So the book is based on these two characters, strangers on a plane, sitting next to each other, young guy, old guy. Young guy is a businessman who's just going to go to sleep until the older guy let him know that he actually was wealthy. And so then the young guy was interest was piqued. And then the flight, it's called The Flight Who Changes Everything. The flight then becomes a scenario of the older guy sharing his life journey. And within that, 10 life lessons ultimately win the young guy over.
Hello there and welcome to the My Future Business Show. It's Rick Nuske here. It's wonderful to have you with us. And I like to say at every single starting of an interview, how grateful I am to have you supporting the show. And if you are new to the show, I know that you're in for a treat today, because on today's show, I have the pleasure of welcoming multiple best-selling author and TEDx speaker, Mr. Corey Poirier. Welcome to the show, Corey.
Thank you, Rick. I'm super stoked to be here.
Yeah, excited to have you here. Now, you and I are going to be talking about many things, including the importance of purpose, how to create a mission statement for your life and your business, and about your latest book called The Enlightened Passenger. But before we do any of that, Corey, we always, in fact, take some time out to learn a little bit more about you. So where are you calling in from today?
I'm in Prince Edward Island in Canada. So it's about 3 hours from Nova Scotia, if people are familiar with it, or another direction would be it's about 4 hours north of Maine.
Fantastic. That's been home for a long time for you?
It's where I was born.
Right.
And I moved away when I was about 19-ish.
Yep.
And stayed away for probably 8 years in one place. And then I moved to another place closer to home. Lived there for 12 years and then found my way back to home about 9 years ago. So it's like a full circle thing.
Oh, I love it. Tell me, what do you love about the place? What draws you back, do you think?
Well, the immediate answer, and it was really what the driver was for my wife and I, she was living the other side of the country. We kind of got together while she was there, even though we both grew up in the same town. And at one point, she's just like, why am I living in this place? I don't know anybody here. And so we decided to load up her car. I was technically had already kind of moved in with her, I think, but I was still living on the opposite side of the country.
Of course.
And we loaded up her car and her dog Sprocket, who was like, I think 12 or 13 at the time, a little silky terrier. We loaded up the car and drove across 16 states and 5 provinces. 26 states and 5 provinces in 16 days, and moved back home with the idea that like our friends were home. Her father, who was older, was home. My mother, was home. And so it made sense to get back closer to home. Since that time, we've had 2 kids, a 6 and a 3-year-old. That's what they are now.
Yep.
And basically happy with this choice because their grandfather passed like 6 months ago, but they got to experience him. You know what I mean? Like,
fantastic.
He got to experience having grandchildren and stuff like that, or at least
Beautiful.
from her. And so I guess that was the draw to come back home. But one of the things I like about here, like right now I'm at my office and I look out my window and I'm looking at the water and ships going by and, so now that spring and summer is here, it's amazing. I will say it's not for the faint at heart in the winter.
No. Yeah. Well, it's quite a spectrum of range of temperature, isn't it?
Yeah. Canada, for those unaware, is pretty intense in the winter.
Thank you very much. I love this section of the call because we do, lift the lid on, I guess, more of your personal aspects of your life. And I think that's where the My Future Business Show sticks out. Now, I know, given that, you're involved in speaking and book writing and running a business and helping people, you mustn't have too much time for hobbies and sports. But if you do, what do you get into?
So I do. It's weird. My hobbies would be different now than they were years ago, pre-kids, let's say, and then even pre-wife. My hobbies were different. So what I used to do, and what I would consider hobbies, I guess, is I used to perform stand-up comedy. I did that for 9 years, 700 shows. Wow. I also played music in clubs. So I released 4 CDs. I did like mini tours more in the region I'm in and released music videos and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That was the hobbies, but it's a little hard to do both of those and speak and be on the road and everything else. So now I'm not big, but I love to read. So I always have a book I'm reading, and that's sort of a hobby. But at the same time, the other thing that, because I get to travel so much, is I love going to concerts. I'm really big on experiences over material things.
Yes.
And so, we just literally, my wife and I just got, you can see it on the screen, but matching tattoos.
I love it.
So
Fantastic.
we were together 9 years, and I haven't put a ring on her yet, but we say wife because we're common law. But I said this will be a huge commitment. So that's how far I went so far, as we both got the same tattoo on different hands. But even that's like a hobby to me, just meeting people and having experiences. And like I say, going to concerts. This trip that we have coming up to New York next in a week and a half, I'm looking at maybe going to an open mic comedy show and performing at a comedy show. I haven't done it in like a year and a half, 2 years. And previous to that, I hadn't done it in like 7 years. So I never know when I could pull out that card. And so I still have a lot of kind of what I'll call hobbies, but it's just a little different, because before it was like, I know for this year, I'm going to be performing comedy all year and playing music and all that. And now it's just like, when I get time, here's what I'm going to do.
Wow, that's great feedback. Now, I wonder, given that life often comes full circle when we become parents, how much do you value spending time with your kids and your wife and just doing family stuff?
Very much so. One of the things that's changed as well over the years is, again, pre-wife. So when pre us dating, it wasn't abnormal for me to work a lot of evenings and weekends, and pull a 70-hour week running the business. I mean, I've been in business over 20 years. So if I look at that, like early on, as I heard a friend of mine say recently, Anthony Trucks, we don't realize sometimes how much work happens in the dark based on what we see in the light. And so I did a lot of work in the dark, and a lot of evenings, weekends, that kind of thing. But whenever we got together, I slowed that down. And then when we had children, now I'm down to conservatively, I'm in book launch mode now. So it's going to be different for the next 3 months. But for quite a while now, it's been like 35 hours a week, which blows people's minds. So I don't work as much as people would think I do. And maybe sometimes I bring it home with me, but for the most part, I try not to. And we travel, so I get to bring the kids on the road and we spend time together. And so when I do a travel trip like we just did, we were on the road almost 3 weeks, and I probably would say 50% of the time I was with the kids. I was with them every night, but 50% of the time, even during the day. And so I value it heavily, but also I value probably more so than quantity. I value quality time. And it makes me think of an interview I had one time with Tom Ziegler, who would be Zig Ziglar, the late Zig Ziglar's son.
Of course. Wow.
Yeah. And Tom shared that with his father, he used to be on the road like 300 and some days a year. But because he was so all in when he was home, he felt like he was home more than the guy next door was home with his kid, who was home every night of the week, but never really looked at his kid.
Never really
there. Yeah, I think it comes down to what you do during those times. And so I do really heavily value our family time, because I didn't realize it when I was younger or whenever I was growing up. But I realize now that the time, like I think about times that I spent with my family growing up, and I think about, was that a great experience, positive? What kind of impact did that have? And so I realized that these moments do actually matter, and they will really, I guess we'll say, shape who my children become.
Well, that's interesting you say that, because as a parent myself with young children, young boys, I often think, what is my legacy going to be for them? What am I aspiring to teach them? What values and things like that do you want to leave with them?
Yeah, actually, I just shared this with somebody today, but my wife, whenever we were recently, so we're working on the book. Not everybody will know what I mean by this, but we have a book launch page that we're finishing up, and I was working on the copy, so like what the page actually will say, and I asked her if she wanted to take a peek at it, and so she did, and she's a part of the business as well, and so she read through it and offered some suggestions. Well, halfway through that, our son was like, I like trying to get her attention and like trying to interrupt and stuff. And she said, the trip we just went on and how much fun we had. And he said, yeah. And she said, do you like going on those kind of trips? And he said, yeah. And she said, well, what we're doing right now is how we pay for those trips. And I thought that was a really good lesson to him, in the sense that we have to do this sometimes, the work in the dark, to have that fun in the light. And also the other thing is, I think my son sees something different than some children may see, in the sense that I am excited for every day. I get excited to get up and go do what I do. And I think that, to your point about what legacy am I leaving, I think that also, in a lot of ways, sets the tone for the shape of my children's future, is the fact that they see somebody doing something they love, but also paying the bills doing it.
Look, I'm sure they're very, very proud of you, doing some great work, which we're going to be tapping into in a moment. But speaking of kids, I wonder what your life was like growing up. Tell us a little bit about, some positive memories that you have of, life growing up.
So I was in a lot of ways raised by a single mother, but my father was a part of my life until I was about 9.
Yep.
And what's really wild is in those early years, I actually had this kind of jaded idea of my parents in the sense that I thought my father was, I don't know the best way to say it, but doing more of the work than he really was.
Yep.
And I only realized that after him and my mother split up. So I kind of revered him, looked up to him. I had fond memories, like he brought home one time for my birthday a motor go-kart that I could ride on. And of course, as a kid,
That's
your
cool.
father brings you home. Yeah, it's pretty epic. And so, I like that when he did that. And then also I wasn't supposed to be going out because I told my mom I was sick that day. And he's like, don't be so foolish. Just go out and play in your motor go-kart and go get your friends and stuff. And at the time, I looked at my mother as like, the evil one.
The Wicked Witch of the West.
Yeah, and he was like the hero. And so what I'm getting at is that it was a fond memory. It still is.
Yeah.
But I didn't really realize that my mother was holding up the fort until it was just me and my mother.
Absolutely.
And so I remember I have lots of great memories of both my mother and father, traveling together with them, doing lots of fun. And I really think my father had the best of intentions. I just don't think he knew how to be a father. But I also know now that he wasn't really doing the work. And I say doing the work, I mean, he was out, earning money. And it was different back then. I mean, a lot of men didn't change diapers. I asked my mom recently, and it sounds like my grandfather was the only man in my entire extended family that changed a diaper. And so that was normal. And he was out working kind of to help contribute. And my mother at the time wasn't working. She ended up working later on while they were together, but she wasn't working. So you could make the argument, well, they each had kind of the traditional roles that we always hear about. But like I said, I realized later on how much my mother looked like the bad guy when she was really just caring for me and doing what's right.
Look, that's such great feedback, and I'm so glad that you're able to, harness those positive memories, and you came to that realization. And obviously that in those formative years, that would have made, it wouldn't have made much sense at the time, but I bet you it makes a lot of sense now. Now, you have been around some incredibly influential people throughout your life, Corey, but in those early formative years, as you was, let's say, turning into a teenager, who was around you that really had an impact on the man that you've become today, do you think?
More than anyone else, I'll take my mother, out of the equation because I already mentioned her, and she was obviously a big part of it.
Yep.
But if I take her out of the equation, without even hesitation, it would be my grandfather. Basically, he stepped in and became my father in a lot of ways. I'm an only child. My mother's an only child. So a really tiny, immediate family. And he taught me how to drive my first car. My first car, and this was after my father wasn't very active in my life.
Yep.
My first car, I remember I bought it for $400. It was a Chevette. And he actually loaned me, he went and co-signed a loan for me because he wanted me to build credit instead of just giving me the $400. And I didn't realize how big a thing that was.
Man.
Yeah, I mean, it was such a low price car. I was like, why don't you just buy it for me? And he goes, no, I think we should go through the banking system. And I didn't get it at the time. Of course, I wouldn't have got it no matter what he's tried to say. But I mean, it obviously it started my credit at age 16, which is a powerful thing. And there was a lot of things he did, like, anytime I had an issue, like something needed to be built, he was a carpenter with a grade 3 education, but he was wildly talented beyond his education. He built a fiberglass space shuttle replica scale with his bare hands.
That's
a hammer
incredible.
And a bag of nails. And so, yeah, so I mean, another thing he did is show me by example what was possible. Somebody would look at a guy with a grade 3 education and say, how could he possibly do that without knowing how to work with fiberglass? But he did it. And I watched him do it. And I remember at age 7 on the local news station, they did a segment on him, and they said, this ordinary carpenter with a bag of nails and a hammer. And I said, that's no ordinary carpenter. And I realize now the gifts he gave me that way. But like I said, he helped if I needed stuff built. He would help me build it or build it for me. Whenever I would get lost in Canada, I was lost. So I used to live in Nova Scotia, and I would always get lost coming home. I'd always miss the same turn, and I could never get in my head why I was missing it. But I would call him, and he would, all the patience in the world of a saint, he would like guide me through as if I hadn't called, 30 times in the last year. And so, again, I know it's a long answer. He was also an entrepreneur. First example I ever had of an entrepreneur, which I ended up becoming. But yeah, I think he laid most of the foundation for who I am, and was also instrumental in me making decisions that were probably wise. Like when I told him I wanted to become a rock musician, which in a lot of ways is kind of funny because I ended up going down that path. But it wasn't really my full path, and I didn't know it then. I just thought it was. And I said to him at like 17, I want to become a rock star. I don't need to work and all this. And he said, well, I think you're going to do that, but I think it can't hurt to have the education to fall back on just in case. So like, instead of him saying, that's ridiculous, you'll never achieve that, he said, oh, no, you're definitely going to do that. However, why don't you also do this? And so there's so many ways, I have to say that he was that biggest influence in my life for sure.
He is an incredible man. I wish I had the opportunity to meet him. You're blessed to have had him in your life, that's for sure and certain, Corey. Now, tell me a little bit about what's happened in your musical life. Love to hear about it.
Yeah, so on the music side, I've been on a break for a while now, and I plan to quote unquote come out of semi-retirement at some point. But in fact, we just did our basement over, and one of the things I did in doing the basement over is I set up a section for the drum kit was just set up last night, literally.
Excellent.
We just got back from away, and the basement was finished while we were away, and so just set up the drum kit. And soon we're actually setting up a board to hang the guitars on. Yep. So I'm going to hang up. I already got it figured out, but it's 16 guitars, so 8 on top, 8 on the bottom. Yeah, that's all. I should have had some of those are bass guitars, some are acoustic, some are electric, but they're all there in the mix. And so going to set that all up. And the idea there is that I'll start, two of my cousins have played in my bands in the past, and we both lived near each other again, which didn't happen for a lot of years. So I feel like I'll start inviting them over for jams, and that'll get me back into that energy. But basically, I started writing music when I was 12. I wrote my first song called Waiting when I was 12, and I didn't even realize I didn't know how to play that well at the time. So honestly, Rick, I kind of made up what it should go like, and it's fascinating to me years later to realize they were actually chords, proper chords.
Yes.
And the song is a well-written song, and it's a progressive song that grows. It starts as a ballad, and it gets progressively faster, and it's still a song when I play it live, people love it, and it blows my mind that happened at 12. But then I kept writing music throughout the years. So ultimately, I don't know how many songs I've written. I haven't kept track. But I mean, I know I have 4 albums that would each have, let's say 12 original songs on them. So I would say conservatively, I've written over 100 songs.
Wow.
And some of the songs, a lot of the way I write, those songs like literally are channeled. Like I'll sit down and say, you know what, I'm going to see if anything comes out. And if it doesn't, I will play for a bit. Like I'll play with it for a bit, but 99% of the time, it means I'm not ready to write a song that night. Yeah. And then the other times when I sit down, it's just like, if the song is 7 minutes long or 4 minutes long, it takes me a minute longer because I literally write it without stop. I don't say what rhymes with orange. It just comes right out. I don't even I know what the song theme usually is about. Like I'll start singing it, and by the first couple of words, I'm like, oh, I know what this is going to be about. But then the rest of it, I don't even think about what makes sense. It just flows. It's pretty wild. And so I written and released 4 albums. I don't even know the name we're supposed to put it on anymore because it's changed so much. It was albums, then it was CDs, then it was back to albums. Now it's digital tracks or whatever. But I've released 4, and the 4th one was nominated for Rock Recording of the Year.
Oh,
and
wow.
I think that one allowed me to kind of take a break from it because I think I was chasing something early on. I had a girlfriend back in the day. I should mention, I was tone deaf. I still can't tune a guitar by ear. And so I wasn't necessarily the first, person on the list in the yearbook to be listed as a future rock star. And so I wasn't that great of a singer. I was terrible. I was not terrible, but bad on the guitar. And I remember singing one time, and this girl that I was dating at the time, first time she heard me, she's like, "Oh my God, my ears are bleeding." She's terrible. And then I said, "Well, are you saying I couldn't play live?" And she said, "Just let me know before you do, because I really want to end this so I'm not embarrassed in public." And that was my first time I ever was in front of anybody. And I think that could have destroyed me. I know it has for other children in the past, of parents saying that, and stuff like that, probably spouses and girlfriends as well, and boyfriends saying it to people. But for me, I was like, I'll show you. And I never did it like vengeance. I just I'll show you. And we broke up. And then what's really fascinating is then I ended up doing a lot of stuff with music. And my mother said one time that same ex-girlfriend called her one time and asked about my music and asked what I was doing and asked if I was still single. So I looked at that was kind of like that was kind of the comeuppance, I guess.
Well, I reckon that's a really good segue into my next question, because I love to think about, mindset and what drives somebody like you, what motivates you. And you've given us a demonstration right then about how, I'm not going to listen to you. I'm going to listen to my internal locus of control. I'm going to listen to my internal dialogue. How important is that to have control of that?
Well, I mean, quite honestly, I think it's everything. But I didn't then, I didn't know the difference then.
Yeah.
I've said many times that I think the most powerful word in the English language. Now, the most powerful word, according to Dale Carnegie, I didn't read my first book till age 27, and it was How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie.
Oh, yes.
And according to Dale Carnegie, the most powerful word in the English language to the average person is the sound of their own name. Now, for me, I think the most powerful word in the English language for the average person, especially when it comes to success and fulfillment, would be, to me anyway, for the average person, I think is mindset. And so this goes back to your question, Rick. Having control of our mindset is everything.
Yep.
So being able to have control of what we bring into our mind, what I'll call it our output, what comes out of our mind, what kind of impact that has on our mind. I believe that's the thing we can control. I mean, we have basically choice is the one thing we have domain over. And I think we have the choice to basically, for lack of a better word, sculpt our mindset to what we want it to be. And that could be for better or worse. And so that could be everything from the books that we read, because that's part of feeding our mind. That can be who we surround ourselves with, because that can be a reflection of who we become. And so, again, it's a long way to say, I think we absolutely have a responsibility for the fact that we have control over our mindset and the results that we actually get as a result of how we direct our mind. So hopefully that answers the question.
No,
but
absolutely. No, that's great feedback. Thank you again, Corey. Now, I read something about you in Success Magazine as an emerging, one of just 15 emerging entrepreneurs. Tell us a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess the backstory to the experience is ultimately, so for me, I read, I think I have a copy of it here somewhere, Success Magazine. Actually, this is pretty wild. Just like, I know people can't necessarily see this. Maybe they can, but
yes, I can.
Okay, perfect. So I have been a reader of Success Magazine for, I mean, I'm going to say conservatively 15 years.
Long time.
And early on, it was one of those manifest things. Like, I want to manifest being a feature profile in Success Magazine or having an article in Success Magazine, being involved in some capacity. And then out of nowhere, I got a message saying that somebody had nominated me for this emerging entrepreneur thing for Success Magazine. And to be honest, I'm going to be very full disclosure, even if it doesn't, paint a good light. I thought there was a chance that I'm ever going to have an opportunity. Like, there's only 15 in all the world, and Success Magazine has profiled thousands upon thousands of thought leaders. There's millions of readers. I thought there's no chance I'm going to be one of those 15. And so, but I was nominated, and I said, well, I got nothing to lose. And so they sent an email saying I was nominated, and I had to accept the nomination and fill out a form and all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
So I did. And it was one of those things where, like I said, I wanted to be in Success Magazine, and I thought it would be the be-all, end-all, and I strived for that for years. And then I ultimately kind of stopped striving for it. Like, I didn't keep talking about it. And I just felt, maybe it's not my calling. Like, maybe that's just not my thing. And I do believe that when we try to manifest, sometimes we get, the Rolling Stones song says, you don't always get what you want, but you get what you need. So maybe I didn't need to be in it. It's where my head was at. And I kind of just left it where it was at, had it on my vision board, but never put much more thought to it. And then when that opportunity came up, I didn't really have to do much because I was nominated by somebody else. Then I had to fill out a form, just kind of confirming I want to be nominated and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then, much to my surprise, I got, again, since people can see it, I got this in the mail.
Oh, wow.
Which is a plaque from Success Magazine saying Success Emerging Entrepreneurs 2022, Corey Poirier. But I had that thing of saying I always want to be in the magazine. And then that's why I was opening this magazine. I don't know if we can see it here. Right there.
There you are.
There I am in Success Magazine as part of the Emerging Entrepreneurs.
That's incredible.
So it didn't happen. My point of that is too, Rick, is it didn't happen in my timing and on my timeline. It happened when it was meant to happen, but it still happened. Yes. And so we talk about manifestation, and I believe if people believe in the law of attraction manifestation, which I think most people do, then I think you also have to understand that it might not come the way you expect it to come. It might come in a different form. And I would say winning this award and being in that position in the magazine is probably bigger to me than if I would have had an article in the magazine.
Yeah, look, I tell you what, but the rabbit hole goes even deeper because you've gone on to give TEDx talks, and that's a revered stage to be a part of. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the TEDx thing, I've done 4 so far, and I have my 5th one coming up literally in today's the 3rd, the 17th, what's that, 14 days, 2 weeks from today, I have my 5th, and I'm going to retire, I think, at 5. I thought I was going to retire at 3, and I hadn't done one in like 3 or 4 years, and then I got tricked into applying. It's a long story, but I was helping somebody else, and I was showing them using my application, and then they said, well, you've already done the work, you might as well apply, and I wasn't going to do it, but anyway, I eventually sucked it up, did it, and then I got a message saying, hey, you've been selected. So, but the answer is, yeah, so I've been on the TEDx stage multiple times. Each experience has been dramatically different. I will say what's interesting is the first one I didn't realize it was a big deal yet. Like, I think it was earlier on in my knowledge of TEDx. Like, it's not that long ago, but it was like a number of years ago.
Yeah.
And what happened was somebody recommended me or nominated me, but it was past the deadline. But they kept their nominations open, but it was past the actual official deadline. And so they messaged me and said, we really loved your idea, but you missed the deadline and we've already selected the speakers. And then about 3 weeks before the event, which might have been like 4 or 5 months later, I got a message from them saying, somebody dropped out and yours was the next one we wanted that we couldn't have. Are you interested? So I literally had 2 weeks to prepare my TEDx and deliver it. And that was how my first one shook out. And then from there, every other one was like completely different. Like the last one I did was the most intense one. Like you had to do more practicing and training and everything else than I've ever done. And the newest one is the least I've ever done, meaning like the least amount of prep. It's like, they just said, send us a video. If we like the idea, then you can just memorize the talk and just show up an hour before and leave right at like an hour after.
You know what? You seem to be very comfortable in your skin, and I think it's a reflection of the fact that you've found a direction in your life, you have a mission, and you have a purpose. And I think, again, it's another great segue to talk about the importance of purpose. Could you share a little bit about your perspective of this?
Yeah. So to me, I'll say, I mean, I'll just say I hesitate to say something is everything, but honestly, it is one of those things where I'll say, I think finding your purpose is everything. And so what I mean by that is I can tell you directly that my life has been transformed from night to day once I discovered meaning. And so pre-discovering meaning in my life, I battled hypochondria for 4 years, anxiety for 2 of those years. For those that don't know, hypochondria is whenever you read about a disease, you start having the symptoms of said disease. And so I really, like, I was not negative necessarily as a person, but I was definitely like, poor me. And, this always happens to me and I'm not going to make it to my whatever birthday. And like, I was very much that person. And then what happened was one night, and I won't go into all the detail, but I got tricked into, you'll notice a common theme when I get tricked into stuff. I got tricked into performing stand-up comedy one night. This one was like legit tricked, like 100% tricked. Went to a comedy workshop, 3 weeks of it. The third week, we were supposed to watch comics entertain us, and we only found out 5 minutes notice that there were no entertainers. We were actually the comics.
Oh.
And none of us had material ready. 8 people walked out the front door to 15. 7 stayed. I was one of the 7. I didn't know any better, so I went up first, told 2 jokes, only to discover the mic wasn't even turned on yet. And so that was kind of my start in stand-up. But here's the interesting part, Rick, because I bombed, as we call it in comedy, that night and for the next year and a half. I don't even think I ever had a hearty laugh from one audience member for a year and a half. But what happened is I went into the office that next day after the first performance, and somebody said, "Did you meet somebody tonight? Like, did you meet a girl or something? Because you have a different kind of vibe or jump in your step or energy."
Yeah.
And I didn't fully know yet. That was the moment that I had found a passion for the first time in my life. And I always say purpose, passion as the gateway to purpose. So when you find passions, usually your passion or often your passion can change over and over. Your purpose rarely changes a lot in my experience. And so the passion was performing stand-up comedy. At the time, I didn't know what the purpose was yet. What was the meaning behind it? All I knew is I get excited when I did it. And later on, I realized what I was getting out of it beyond what I was getting was that I was able to take a person that had a horrible day. They came to a comedy club. And even if I was bombing, or if I was bombing, they were still laughing at me. But it was letting them forget about all their problems.
Yes.
And that was what I was doing. And so I didn't know then, but what I figured out in my life, in the bigger picture, is for me, my purpose is ultimately creating a positive ripple for everybody I come in contact with. Well, I can do that in many different ways. Like I can do that with comedy, with music, speaking, what have you. The first, again, gateway or the first step into it was comedy. But what I realized after a while, the reason I could do all of these things and enjoy them is because they were all serving a bigger purpose. So to me, to answer your question initially, purpose is everything for me, because I might not be here today if it wasn't for purpose. I don't know that either way. I often call it vitamin P. And I say it's the one vitamin you can't buy in the stores, and then maybe the most important one you'll ever take. Because what I've experienced is when people have meaning in their life, they're happier about life. They're more passionate. They have more energy. They're sick less often. People want to be around them more. And I could go on and on. They love telling stories, and they're just energetic, and people get excited to be near them because what's this person on? And and I always say it's like, I'm like that kid that loves Christmas whenever I wake up every morning and gets to run down to Christmas again. Every day is like Christmas for that. And that's, some people don't like Christmas. I'm saying for the kid that loves Christmas, that's what I feel like every day. And so I could never go back and undo that, unknowing what I know, but it changed. Again, the only way I can say it is it literally changed the essence and core of who I am from that day forward. And I can never go back. And it all started on that stand-up stage that one night. The purpose, I can't tell you exactly when I clued in and said, this is why I'm doing it, but somewhere along the way that happened. And that allowed me to say that I can do this in multiple ways, but ultimately what I want to do is create an invisible impact for other people.
I tell you what, you started to light up as if you were on fire when you started talking about vitamin P, and it really has energized the call. Thank you so very much. Now, you have an incredible background. I don't know how you pulled this off, but you've been talking with the likes of Gary Vaynerchuk, Bob Proctor, Jeff Walker, Tommy Chong, my most favorite man on this planet. Tell us how these interviews came about, because I'm really, really impressed.
So, I mean, there definitely was both a strategy and a happy accident in the mix there, Rick. So the happy accident part was I had a newspaper when I was well, I'll start over and say whenever I was like 19, I launched a business publication like a newspaper, similar to Success Magazine, since I just showed it.
Yeah.
But it was like a regional newspaper. And it's the same concept though. Like I was interviewing entrepreneurs, and I did it for a year only to realize I was, like I say, 19. I'd never done sales before. And all of a sudden it was a straight commission because I only made money if we sold ads.
Yep.
I had to do everything from scratch. And by the end of the year, it became clear financially it wasn't going to be able to sustain itself. I had broken even from day one, but breaking even is different than being able to pay all your bills as well. And so I just, the market, like I was just too naive and too young and didn't have the experience. And so we did well for what I had, but decided to drop the paper. And then fast forward a bunch of years, became a keynote speaker, was able to do side hustles whenever I wanted. And so I decided to relaunch a similar publication. This time it was called Island Business News, and launched it. It ran for 7 years and ended up doing thousands of interviews with that. A lot of it was local entrepreneurs and regional entrepreneurs.
Yep.
But in the last year, something occurred to me. I put the list together and said who I want to interview. And I realized that I could interview some big names with this publication based on the fact that it was print whenever print was dying. So the idea was that I could put somebody in the front cover of a print magazine that can reach 30,000 people. And that was more exciting to them than being on a podcast or even a radio show that could reach 500,000. And so I leveraged that to get a few big names like Jack Canfield, Robin Sharma, who wrote The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari.
Yes.
And Trish Stratus, who's like a Hall of Fame wrestler.
Incredible.
And so I was able to get some of them. We put them on the front cover of the paper, interviewed them. I mean, there's stories behind there. The very first big one was Jack Canfield, and it took 4 months to schedule it. And I was told no, it would be very unlikely. He was turning down 9 out of every 10 interviews. He had nothing launched at the time. There was no reason to do interviews. And what happened was I found out that Dan Sullivan from Strategic Coach was Jack's coach. And I guess the short version is I found Dan on Jack's website as a testimonial. I found a creative way to reach out to Dan. I got Dan on the show. I brought up Jack a bunch of times, hoping that he would, basically comment on it. Dan said something to the effect of, Corey, Jack should be on your show. He would love the show, and tell him I said so. So then I sent it to Jack's team, and I said, even Dan, Jack's coach, thinks he should be on my show. And they sent a calendar link and said, book your spot. You've beaten us into submission. But the point of that, Rick, is that there was some strategy and there was some happy accidents.
Yep.
But I started it through the newspaper, and then about a year in, I realized there was no way I could sustain the paper long time. I could keep the paper going, and it was making money, but the problem was it could never grow beyond what it was. Honestly, in this where the paper was, I could literally today still be operating it, and it still would be bigger than it was then, and it could probably bring in multiple 6 figures even in a small little place. But I could never grow beyond the small little place, and I had bigger vision than that. So basically, I essentially took it from a paper to a podcast. And what I did, which was unique early on, is I actually brought a lot of the sponsors over from the paper to the podcast. So I was one of the people early on, I think, that have an independent podcast and have almost 6 figures in sponsorship coming in before I ever had a listener. So like I brought the sponsors on before we had listeners. But it was because they trusted me from the paper.
Yes.
And so we ran that way for 5 years until eventually I realized it was way too much work. We had like 7 guests on the show, and it was just insane. It was like a variety hour. And also we had to make space for sponsors to be on the show, just to obviously thank them for being a part of it. And I just decided, you know what? I want to go to a traditional format. And I went to one-on-one interviews. But I told you all that backstory because each one of those little moments allowed me to get bigger names. So like, for example, once I had Jack and Robin and Arlene Dickinson from Dragons Den and a few other big names, I was able to leverage those names to get other names. So I could go to now Mark Victor Hansen, who I've become friends with since, who co-created Chicken Soup. And I could go to Mark and say, hey, Dan, who I know is your coach as well, and Jack, who used to be a writing partner, both on the show, you need to come on the show.
Of course.
And so honestly, it was like a domino effect. Like I had to knock down the first few dominoes. Once I did, it became easier and easier. And so honestly, there's some version of all the stuff I've been sharing that's led to different interviews. But at the end of the day, I just am like a pit bull. I just kept trying to find new ways in. And trying to find creative ways to reach out to who would be the best point of contact, like Tommy Chung. I originally tried through their PR company, never heard back ever. Tried through another place, never heard back. Then I found out one of his family members who was involved in the business with him, and then that was kind of how I got in. So I just kept being creative, still creative, and kept leveraging the names I did have to make them, because here's what happens. They look and say, well, if Tommy Chong said okay, and Brian Austin Green said okay, and Lisa Nichols and Jack Canfield said okay, hey, I might as well say okay. I can trust this show. They all said yes unless they vetted it. So it's almost like those names allowed the vetting so that other people trust me to come onto the show.
I can't help but think about, it's one thing to have compound interest, but it's another thing to have that compound awareness. And I think that 6 degrees of separation and the networking effect is the sum total of everything that you've achieved today. And it's a real credit to you. And that's probably the most powerful takeaway that I've had for today's call today, Corey. I really do thank you for that. Now let's talk about your new book. What's it called?
Yeah. So, and this ties into that. So, the idea of, I do believe in now, don't believe, I know for a fact, we all have 1 degree of separation away from whoever we want to reach. Now, whether we reach them or not is probably optional. But as an example, I was working on a documentary pre-COVID, and basically one of the people that I interviewed was Will Smith's coach and life coach, and she pitched my stuff to Will Smith. So like I'm 1 degree away.
It's crazy.
It's insane. But once you get it, then what happens is, I find, Rick, is then you don't have that this can't happen, or I can't do this anymore, because you're like, if this can happen, well, this can happen. And so I say all that to say, with the book, it's interesting because all that stuff we've been talking about really, in a lot of ways, is kind of responsible for how the book is being launched and what the book looks like. So what I mean by that is those interviews that I did, first of all, the book is a fictional parable, which is also a spiritual book. Now, it's not really highly spiritual. Like it wouldn't, quote unquote, turn anybody off who's not spiritual.
Understood.
But it's like The Alchemist or like Celestine Prophecy in that way. And so the book itself is fictional, and it's based on these two characters, strangers on a plane, sitting next to each other, young guy, old guy. Young guy is a businessman who sits in first class and actually paid to have the second seat next to him free, only to fall asleep and wake up to the old man sitting next to him. Asked him how he got there. He said he was bumped up from economy because it was oversold. And the young guy was just going to go to sleep until the older guy let him know that he actually was wealthy. And so then the young guy was piqued. His interest was piqued. He wants to know how the old guy got wealthy. And then the flight, it's called The Flight Who Changes Everything. The flight then becomes a scenario of the older guy sharing his life journey, and within that, 10 life lessons that ultimately win the young guy over. Now, having said that, the part that's connected to all my interviews is the 10 lessons are the 10 top lessons, in my opinion, that I've learned during interviews with the world's top thought leaders. Yeah. And even in the book, the character, older character, whose name is Treb, he actually references stuff. So he'll say like, when I was sharing the bill, I was backstage in the green room with Les Brown. And when I asked him about synchronicity, he said, synchronicity is God's way of staying anonymous. Well, Les Brown said that to me in his living room in Atlanta, but I took it into the story as Treb, the character who's a speaker, travels, all that stuff, writes books, interviews people. I basically portrayed it as this was said to Treb backstage so that I could reveal all these lessons, but it's revealed through the character's lens.
Yep.
So you could say ultimately it's loosely based on my life, but ultimately the book is about those 10 lessons. And then the other side of that is that, we've talked about a few of the lessons in here, but like, as we've been talking, but the book itself, the idea is I want to reach people through a story that helps them, especially if they're like the young passenger. I want them to feel like, as the reader, they're being taught these 10 life lessons. And so ultimately I wrote it as a story that way instead of a nonfiction book, because I know for myself, Celestine and The Alchemist and Augmedino's books, they changed my life, because in the story capacity, I was able to learn without realizing I was learning. So it's almost like tricking people into learning in some ways. But yeah, so that's what the book's about. It's called The Enlightened Passenger. It's about, like we said, who is the enlightened passenger? Is it the young guy or old guy? Well, you'll have to read the book to find out, I guess.
Of course.
It's called The Flight That Changes Everything because we see an actual transformation take place in real time across the flight. And honestly, it's a passion project that, much like I said about songs earlier, I feel like it was channeled through me. Like, it was written very quickly each time I sat down to write. And then the one thing I'll say that we decided to do with it that's unique with a parable book is we're launching it with bonuses, with a page where you go on and buy the book, but then you actually can enter your order number and get access to, for one thing, what my training around how to land a branded talk, like a TEDx talk, which is a smaller version of my $5,000 program. You get access to my Get Paid to Speak book for those that think they might ever want to speak on a stage. Another, I think, gift is it's the top 10 insights that I've learned from all these interviews in a PDF format. So we decided to launch it as a $15 book, but also launch it so that we could offer it with bonuses and, of course, incentives for people to grab the book. And Rick, honestly, I don't know of any other parable spiritual fiction book that's been done with.
I tell you what, you are setting the gold standard, and it's a real credit to you. I wish you all the very best for your upcoming launch. Now, with all that being said, if somebody wants to get their hands on this book, when is it becoming available? Where do they go and get it?
So technically, I would say I can confidently say, as they're listening right now, the book is essentially available.
Right.
So the book is available on various sites, but where I recommend people go is thisisthebook.com.
Love it.
So this is thebook.com. If you go there, it'll give you the steps. It's like 3 steps, takes a minute or 2. And basically it just kind of says, click your favorite retailer here. And it has the link. You go to that retailer, you buy it, you literally come back, put in the order number it gives you, and then via email shortly after, you'll get all the bonuses. It's as simple as that.
I love it. Look, if you're on today's call, you've enjoyed what we've touched on, and we really have just scratched the surface, as it were, with Corey today. If you'd like to get your hands on his latest book, of which he has many, definitely go to that URL. No matter where you listen to this call, you're going to find the links back to Corey and all of the wonderful work he's doing, including his latest book. And with all that being said, Corey, I've really, really enjoyed having you on the show today. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you, Rick, and thank you, everybody, for tuning in.